morning, Mr. Sileka. Good morning, Sileka. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chairperson.
Yeah, I corrected myself. Okay, all right. The oath you took yesterday, Mr. Singh, will continue to apply.
That is fine, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, thank you again for your availability and assisting the Commission. Yesterday we traversed quite a number of issues regarding the MSA, and I want to conclude on that MSA. I was about to go to what is the legal review presented to Eskom by CDH, and that deals specifically with the suspensive conditions, amongst other things that you referred to a couple of times yesterday. But before I do that, Mr. Singh, I want to place on record, Chairperson, the affidavit that I read yesterday of Mr. Pakamani, that matter, Eskom was the applicant, and Mr. Pakamani was an acting group chief executive of the applicant when he deposed to this affidavit. So he was deposing to the affidavit for and on behalf of Eskom. So the requirement for the National Treasury that we read about yesterday is actually Eskom's position. And if Eskom says there was no National Treasury approval, that means the contract was a nullity from inception, which means the contract never came into existence, Mr. Singh. And then it wouldn't matter whether or not the suspensive conditions are fulfilled, because it's neither here nor there. Do you follow that reasoning? Do you follow the reasoning, and then you can comment on what your view is?
Or maybe, Mr. Sileka, maybe there was a contract, but it never came into operation, because for it to get into operation, there were those conditions that needed to be met, and therefore nothing should have been done under it.
Chair, I remember, because the PFMA requirement, it's a legislative requirement.
Yes.
So if that one is not obtained at the beginning, the contract, according to the PFMA, is a nullity. Is void ab initio.
In the end, it might not make much difference whether it was void from the beginning or it did come into being but did not come into effect.
Yes, well.
And nobody ought to have acted under it in circumstances where the conditions had not been met.
Yes, so the chairperson has the suspensive conditions in mind.
That's what I'm think you are talking about, or is that not so?
Oh yes, what? Okay, I hear what the chairperson is saying.
No, I may have missed something. The approvals, were they not the suspensive conditions?
No.
Or the suspensive conditions were different?
We're clause 3.1.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
No,
then the PFMA
okay.
Was clause 22.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. No, that's fine.
Chairperson, I'm sorry to interrupt. I hear what Mr. Sileka says at this point, but with the greatest of respect to him, this is not the issue to be decided here. This is you are here to interrogate, with the greatest of respect, the facts that applied at the time. Whatever position Eskom currently takes ex post facto is a totally different story. My understanding was always that what you need to do is interrogate facts that applied at the time and that people can assist you with and deal with because of their knowledge at that point.
Well, the law as well, because, you know, people are alleged to have entered or done certain things without contracts where they were supposed to do them only if there were contracts. Where you might have some point is the fact that Eskom states a certain factual position doesn't necessarily preclude Mr. Singh from stating the factual position as he understood it. That part, I think that part may be a fair point. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Yes, continue, Mr. Selega.
Yes. So there is that distinction then, because, as I said to you,
As you do so, Mr. Selega, always remember that, as I understand it,
yes, Chair.
Mr. Singh is not a lawyer,
Yes,
but of course, by virtue of his position, he knows some laws, you know. He knows something about, so I'm just saying, as you deal
Yes.
with it, just bear that in mind
Yes.
that, yeah, okay, all right.
especially the Public Finance Management Act, Mr. Singh.
Yeah.
As the Group Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, you should have a working knowledge of that act, because it falls squarely within the purviews of your duties, isn't it?
So, should I write down the questions? Or?
No, the act falls within the purviews of your duties, isn't it?
So, so I'm supposed to respond to that question, not the first one. Or
We
you want
will
me
go to
respond
that.
the first one as well.
Yeah.
Okay, now
I'm saying-
Mr. Singh, Mr. Selega is asking you whether you agree that as Chief Financial Officer of Eskom, you would have been expected to have a working knowledge of the PFMA.
Mr. Chair, I would agree with that, but I would qualify that by saying
Yeah.
that I would be expected to have a working knowledge of aspects that are applicable to my specific domain, which
Yeah.
is finance. Hence, I said Section 54(2)(b), for example, is capital and procurement, capital projects. Those are things that entail us, that we dealt with almost on a daily basis.
Yeah,
In terms of procurement and all of these other aspects, Mr. Chair, hence we have a very specific function within Eskom as well as Transnet. We have a fully fledged group legal function as well as a compliance function, and they are the ones that are capacitated and accountable in terms of delegation of authority framework to be able to deal with these specific matters. And as Mr. Selega said, Mr. Hadeva's affidavit does refer to certain individuals from those specific functions.
A person,
Yeah.
sorry, Mr. Singh's voice is coming over very softly on this
Yes.
side. Yesterday
Yes.
the sound was up quite high, today it's quite low.
okay,
And it's
please,
important that we hear what he says.
please speak up, Mr. Singh. Maybe you could repeat your answer.
So now okay. Is that better? Now? Okay. So, in terms of the question as it relates to the PFMA being something that I should be particularly familiar with, Mr. Chair, yes, I do concede that it's something that I'm familiar with. I am familiar with the sections of the PFMA that apply to me in my specific daily activities as it relates to the CFO. Broader issues like procurement and other aspects of the PFMA, Mr. Chair, are normally left to the specialists, and those are the group legal functions as well as the legal and compliance functions within both the organizations certainly I work for, which is Eskom and Transnet. they are specifically delegated those functions through the delegation of authority framework.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. But clearly, this requirement for National Treasury approval, the team of which you form part was aware of it. It's clear from the documentation.
Sorry, which documentation makes this clear?
The documentation in the bundles, the steering committee meetings, we can see that you talk about that approval even on the 9th of February 2016.
In the steering committee?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it says there it's been obtained.
Correct.
So, so it comes back to this point, sir.
Say again?
Okay, carry on. I'm sure you're going to make a point.
Yeah. This is what I want to do, Mr. Singh, Chair, because I don't want to waste time on this matter. If the National Treasury approval wasn't obtained, that's the one clause of the agreement. The agreement then doesn't start off the blocks. In addition to that, you have the suspensive conditions. Those suspensive conditions, if they are not fulfilled, as CDH, and I was about to go to that yesterday, as CDH found in their legal review to Eskom, it only serves as an aggravating factor. But if you say they were fulfilled, as you do in your affidavit of yesterday, it doesn't change the fact that the Treasury approval, because of lack thereof, the agreement could not have come into force. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand totally, sir. So you want me to respond?
Yes, please.
So firstly, Mr. Chair, as I said to you yesterday, or as you correctly say today, I'm not a legal person, but I will give you my view for what it's worth. And also, secondly, Mr. Chair, in terms of correction to Mr. Seleka, as I said yesterday, when he started with this topic, these matters were not within my personal purview at the time. I understood that there was something that was happening, but they were not in my direct interactions on a daily basis. Even if you look at the affidavit that Mr. Koko had, Mr. Hadebe's affidavit that Mr. Seleka had taken us through, it was Mr. Koko that was dealing with this matter relating to the meeting that he had called with Mr. Lahe, with Mr. Mabalani, and with Mr. Governor. So from that perspective, that team was dealing with it. Ultimately, an individual by the name of Mr. Dave Gori, who was from procurement, engaged with National Treasury to obtain the email that we obtained. Let's just park that there for now, Mr. Chair. So that is the context within which I give my feedback now. So between then and now, I've come across all of this information, which I will now give you my view on. And the reason why I give you my view, Mr. Chair, is because the parliamentary inquiry called on me to provide that. So that is how I come across this information. First point to make, Mr. Chair, is that Mr. Seleka is correct in saying that Mr. Hadebe, in his affidavit, acts on behalf of Eskom and provides a view that Eskom has at this point in time. Similarly, Mr. Chair, when I sit here and I provide an affidavit, I was also an officialist of Eskom at the time. So I provide you a version of the events and the facts that existed at the time. So that was Eskom's view at the time. If it was correct at the time, all well and good. If it is now proven to be incorrect, then it is incorrect. But it's not for me to say whether it was right or wrong, because that's not my, as you said, I'm not a legal person. But all I can tell you now is I knew of the events that occurred leading up to and what the Eskom position was at the time, given the information that we had at the time. So, Mr. Chair, in terms of the National Treasury approval, Mr. Chair. As I said, and maybe we should try and find this email of the 4th of February. Do we have it somewhere in the bundle?
The what?
The email that we received from National Treasury on the 4th of February 2016.
Yes, it's in your affidavit of yesterday.
Did we put it?
You quoted it. I don't know whether you...
Is the email there actually?
Chairperson, it's
Sorry.
indeed in the, an attachment to the affidavit that we
Submitted,
produced yesterday. And maybe it's a good time just to make sure that the affidavit is received as an exhibit, and you can then be referred to specifically to this annexure.
What email is that, Mr. Seleka? I'm not sure what the
Okay.
two of you are talking about.
No,
Mr. Chair, it
You
is,
seem to be talking to the two of you between yourselves only.
Mr. Chair, it's the email that Eskom relies on, that Eskom relied on at the time,
To say what?
to say that it had the required authority to enter into the contract relative
It
to
had the required approvals.
approvals or authority or standing to enter into a risk-based contract. Which is-
Because authority, authority might be something different from approval.
No,
It just
hence I'm
depends.
saying, Mr. Chair.
Approvals.
Well, you see, this is where I think there's some level of confusion in my mind if I look at what's happened. Eskom relies, or Mr. Hadebe relies on, I think, practice note 1, okay, which requires an approval for a deviation, which is what I think Mr. Koko testified to in terms of the document he had signed. The email that we refer to, Mr. Chair, is relying, I think, on a different practice note that effectively allows for entities such as Eskom to allow to enter into risk-based contracts without a deviation necessarily having to be sought from National Treasury. So there's two different schools of thought.
Kind of conflicting.
Oh, from what I can see, I think that's what the problem is, Mr. Chair. And one seeks to say, listen, you have this schedule is applicable, and therefore you can enter into this contract. That is the email that we refer to. What Mr. Hadebe relies on is a schedule that effectively says you require to physically apply for a deviation, which in that case you would have to do something. Submit something to them, consider it, and then receive an application, or an approval, or a non-approval. So in my view, I think that's where the issue lies. And I think, therefore, I'm saying, Mr. Chair, in order for me to demonstrate what the position was at the time when Eskom believed it had the requisite standing, let's call it standing, to enter into the risk-based contract, this email provides that context. So that would be for the issue of whether the PFMA was complied with or not, before we get to the suspensive condition.
Yeah, okay.
Annexure AS8 attached to the affidavit of yesterday, just to make it easy, Chairperson.
Mr. Seleka?
Yes. Chair, just before we go there, what Mr. Anoj Singh should explain to you, Mr. Anoj, to the chairperson, is that there was a practice note, as we read yesterday, 2013-2014, of the National Treasury, which only allowed for contracting on a fee basis, not risk-based. And Eskom had adopted that practice note on their policy for procurement. And hence, the internal people were saying, but you need to obtain Treasury approval if you want to deviate from that policy of ours first, because we have adopted that practice note of National Treasury. So that's what Mr. Hadebe says, that's what Mr. Anoj should know.
No,
that is where the turning point is, Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Okay, let me just understand that.
Yes.
National Treasury had issued an instruction note,
Yes.
and it had laid down certain requirements for the appointment of consultants on a fee basis.
Correct, Chair.
And but they wanted, that is Eskom, wanted to appoint McKinsey on a risk basis.
Correct, Chair.
So in other words, the instruction note on a fee basis wouldn't be applicable to a risk basis.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, in the sense that the risk base is not catered for in that instruction.
Yes. So, but the instruction note from Treasury was understood to deal with the appointment of consultants.
Yes.
And if you were going to, if you wish to appoint consultants, not on a fee basis,
Yes.
but on some other basis, it was understood that nevertheless you must approach National Treasury
For approval.
for approval.
Yes, because you are deviating from a fee basis appointment,
Yeah,
you now want to do something else outside.
yeah. Yes,
But Eskom had taken a step further. They had adopted that into their policy.
yes.
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 And
Okay, so in other words, your point is the appointment of consultants, both in terms of the National Treasury instruction and in terms of Eskom policies, was supposed to be on a fee basis.
correct.
And if you wanted to do something different,
Yes.
you needed, if Eskom wanted to do something different, namely appoint consultants on a basis other than a fee basis, they needed to approach National Treasury
Yes.
for approval to do it that way,
To deviate. Yes.
to deviate.
Yes.
That's the point.
That's the point, Chair. And you
Yes.
find that explicitly
Yes.
in the affidavit of Mr. Pakamani Khadebe,
Okay.
and just for the record.
And is Mr. Singh's position that his understanding was that if Eskom wanted to appoint consultants on a risk basis, Eskom did not need to seek approval for deviation, as you understand it.
Yes, he says they relied on that email
Yeah.
for that position.
From somebody
From National Treasury.
Oh, is that the email he wanted to?
Correct. That's the email he
Okay.
wants to refer the chairperson.
So far, so good in terms of understanding where you stand, Mr. Singh. Namely, if Eskom wanted to appoint consultants on a basis other than a fee basis, was it your understanding that Eskom did not need to obtain approvals from National Treasury?
Mr. Chair, I think you are summarizing it correctly, but I just need to add one
Yeah.
additional point.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Seleka and I think Mr. Hadebe and Mr. Seleka is following there from, is taking a view of convenience to say practice note was clear-cut and was applicable. Right. So from what I can understand in the documentation that we currently have now, that this was not a clear-cut instruction note that was black and white and was applicable or not. There was some ambiguity as to whether it was applicable or not. Now, yesterday when Mr. Seleka took us through Mr. Hadebe's affidavit, and maybe we should go there. What's it again?
Again, Eskom Bundle 14.
Yep.
14D.
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 Okay.
Yes. Oh. 14 bracket D. Oh. She says it's... page 1193.
I think it's 1193.
Yeah. Well, I started reading from page 1193, paragraph 78.1.
Yes. So, Mr. Chair, you will see, and the paragraph that I would like you to go to is, so
I'm
page...
sorry, first of all, what are we looking for at page 1193?
so
That's what you're talking about.
So this is the affidavit I was talking about, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. But if you move to page 11,
And whose
11
affidavit is this?
this is Mr. Hadebe's affidavit, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right.
If we move to page 1195, you see paragraph 81 there, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
It says there was a meeting that was called on or about 27 October by Mr. Koko.
Yeah.
Okay? And 81.1 basically deals with the people that were there, who are basically Mr. Mamalani, Chief Procurement Officer, Mr. Governor, who was the program director on this, Eskom's then Director of Group Capital, two representatives from Vikas, from McKinsey, being Vikas and Dr. Weiss. And 81.2 deals with Mr. Lehe explaining the hold-up in the conclusion of the Master Services Agreement relating to National Treasury approval, which again relates to this matter of the fixed fee versus the risk-based fee, vis-a-vis the instruction note that Mr. Seleka speaks to that found its way into the policy document. 81.4, Mr. Chair, is what is applicable to us. 81.4 basically states, notwithstanding the fact that Mr. Koko signed the instruction note, signed the Eskom policy that gave effect to the instruction note, he still then in 81.4 states, Mr. Koko stated that his intention was to obtain an external opinion on the matter. Okay? McKinsey also stated that they would provide their own view about whether the remuneration model was in line with National Treasury instructions or not. Okay? And Mr. Chair, from there flows two legal opinions. One was obtained from Advocate Kennedy SC, and another one was obtained from a legal firm, Mazwai and Attorneys. Okay? The Mazwai attorney opinion, I think, was received by McKinsey, and the Kennedy opinion was received by Eskom. Okay? So the Eskom opinion from Kennedy, from Advocate Kennedy, Mr. Chair, indicated that he believed at the time that the instruction note may have been applicable. But he also concedes that there is ambiguity as to whether it's applicable or not. So I think his advice was eventually just, engage with National Treasury to understand what the situation is. By that time, Mazwai had given an opinion, and they categorically said, you don't need to get approved. Okay? So there was this ambiguity. So what then happened, Mr. Chair? Subsequent to receiving Advocate Kennedy's opinion as well as Mazwai's opinion, there was then in December, if you recall, Mr. Mabalani issued the letter of acceptance to McKinsey. And in there, Mr. Chair, he actually states the nature of this issue and what Eskom's position was at the time in issuing this letter of acceptance. And if you want to, Mr. Chair, we can take you through, because I think it's important for you to understand the chronology of events in terms of what's transpired on this matter.
Do we have those legal opinions you're talking about in one of the bundles by any chance?
I don't think we incorporated them in the bundles, Chair.
Yeah.
But I know that I think they are annexures, or maybe they're from the what is it? They call it a record bundle in that High Court application, and we can have them. They are available,
Yeah.
but just not incorporated.
No,
in
no,
the
that's,
bundles.
that's fine. Okay, all right. So if they can be, one could see them at
Yes,
some stage.
yes, Chair.
Okay, all right. You, Mr. Singh, you then wanted to, did you want to refer us to the letter of acceptance?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would have
Yes.
liked to. So maybe actually, Mr. Chair, let's just use Mr. Hadebe's affidavit. If we then move to page 1199,
1199, yes.
actually, Mr. Chair,
Does it quote the letter? Looks like it does.
Oh.
87.1.
Mr. Chair, for convenience at this stage, for whatever it's worth, paragraph 84 of Mr. Hadebe's affidavit deals with Advocate Paul Kennedy SC's opinion, and they quote a relevant extract,
Yeah.
if it's helpful for you.
Yeah,
Basically, the opinions are conflicting, Chair.
okay.
Yeah, because one is for Eskom by one of my colleagues, and the other is McKinsey sourcing an opinion from a law firm, and they come to a different conclusion.
Okay,
Mr. Singh, for the purposes of the letter of acceptance, that is in Eskom Bundle 14.
I was just going to use Mr. Hadebe's affidavit.
Will you use that?
Yeah, because it's actually quoted.
Yeah. But I think the chairperson might want to.
Yeah, what is the
letter.
page?
Page 811.111. But now, Chair, that's a different Eskom bundle.
Oh,
That's C.
okay, for what it's worth, let me,
Yeah,
let's
that's
just
C.
have the acceptance letter.
Eight 811.111. And Chair, as you look at it, we did obtain a copy signed by McKinsey.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, but the contents are the same.
I'm not sure I understand the paragraph in the letter of acceptance
Indeed,
that talks
sir.
about a condition.
Indeed.
It says it is a condition of the acceptance that Eskom considered opinion of the National Treasury instruction will hold throughout the life of the contract. I don't know what Mr. Mabelane was trying to say there.
Yes, the same
And
way.
then the next sentence says, in an unlikely eventuality that the said opinion is conclusively altered, the parties hereby agree to review the contract payment basis to reflect the revised opinion. I can't make head or tail what he's trying to say.
Mr. Chair, I also have not, as I said, I was not party to this
Yeah.
drafting of this. All I can say is this is what the position was at the time.
Yes.
17 December, based on these two documents.
But you have got, how can you say this is what the position was at the time if you don't know what it says the position is?
Well, Mr. Chair, as I said, I qualified by saying I
Yeah.
was not party to it, but if you want me to give you my view, I will tell you what existed at the time.
Or what you understood it to be? Yeah, tell me what you understood it to mean.
Well, Mr. Chair, at the time, as I said, I was not party to it, so I didn't know what it meant at the time.
Oh, okay,
So-
well, it doesn't help that. Well, maybe he just formulated this paragraph inelegantly, but I can't tell what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to help you because I am equally lost by the paragraph. But as I said yesterday, Mr. Koko cut a long story short.
Yeah.
Mr. Singh.
But, Mr. Chair, before we go,
Hang on, Mr. Singh, let Mr. Selega finish.
Yeah, he cut the long story short, and I think he appreciated the fact that the conclusion of this agreement required National Treasury approval.
Yeah.
And he didn't have it.
Yeah,
And
and that was it.
he said so much here
Yeah, no,
that
it
it was wrong to conclude this agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Cook.
no, that's fine, but you're asking for my views, I'm giving you my views.
But you don't have a view.
No, I have,
You don't have a view.
I have a view, I'm telling you my view. At the time, Mr. Chair,
You didn't have a view then,
no, sir.
but you have a view now.
Based on the information that I see, yes, Mr.
Yeah, is your view about what this paragraph means, or is it something else?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm taking you through the relevant information that existed, and I'm
Yeah.
bringing you to a point. That is one of the how can I say, pertinent facts that you need to be aware of, that existed at the time, in that Mr. Mabalani issued this letter with that condition.
What is that? Yeah, tell me.
Mr. Chair, the paragraph you just read in the letter of acceptance. Okay?
Uh-huh.
So if we then move on, Mr. Chair,
Wait, the chair doesn't follow you. He's referring to that paragraph, Chair, which you just read, which we cannot understand.
Yeah, no, I've read that paragraph. I don't understand what it means. I thought that you wanted to tell me what you think it means.
oh, okay. So, Mr. Chair, I can attempt to tell you what I think it means now. If you look at, if we go back to 83.1, Mr. Chair.
What
80.
page?
Page 1197,
1197 of
the
That's
same,
Bundle D. That is
14D.
14D.
Yeah, that is of Eskom Bundle 14D.
D.
And page 1197.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah.
So we're at paragraph 83.1.
Yeah.
So there you see, Mr. Chair, on paragraph 83, it says, on 3 December, Mr. Benedict Piri, McKinsey's Associate General Counsel, who is the head of legal, I would assume, sent an email to Mr. Governor of Eskom, and the correspondent read as follows. In essence, they were seeking for Eskom to, appealing to Eskom's bravery. And they also concede that this is a gray area in terms of the applicability of this instruction note. And this is where I try and, Mr. Chair, refer the Commission to two different instructing documents. So Mr. Seleka refers to a practice note of 2013-2014, instruction note 1, am I correct? And if you then have regard for I was still explaining why this thing was there, sorry, Chair. So McKinsey also understands that this is a gray area, Mr. Chair. Now this is after they have obtained the Mazwai opinion, okay, that says the instruction note is now applicable, okay?
But let's try and shorten this if we can. Is your position that you can't say whether or not the conclusion of this agreement was legal or was lawful?
Mr. Chair.
Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, if you give me 3 minutes of maximum,
Yeah.
I will try and conclude this matter.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So my first contention, Mr. Chair, is that we are comparing two different instruction notes. 2003, instruction note 1, which is what Mr. Hadebe and Mr. Seleka relies on, and to an extent now Mr. Koko. But if you move to, 1 second, Mr. Chair. If you move to paragraph 19 of, so page 1202,
You said.
paragraph 90.2, on page 1202,
I'm sorry, what paragraph?
90.2.
Okay, I've got it.
So you see there, Mr. Chair, it says on 4 February 2016, Mr. Chetifango responded stating that
Yes.
it says, practice note 3 of 2003 is still applicable until replaced with a new instruction after the promulgation of new Treasury regulations. The retainer contingency principles are not clearly outlined in the practice note. If you intend applying them, you need to do some further work to ensure that they do not compromise the principles of 217 and other legislation. Now, this is the email I was referring to earlier, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chetifango, Mr. Chair, albeit that Mr. Hadebe basically downplays his capacity, is the Chief Director in National Treasury responsible for governance and monitoring.
Well, before you proceed, you have the quotation in 90.2. What do you understand it to mean?
Mr. Chair, firstly, it tells us that there are two different documents that are actually being used. Mr. Hadebe relies on Practice Note 1 of 2013. This basically refers to Practice Note 3 of 2003. And it says, it is still applicable until replaced with a new instruction after promulgation of the new Treasury regulations.
The Practice Note 3 of 2003, is that the one that is that the one relating to the appointment of consultants on a fee basis?
So, Mr. Chair, the practice note that Mr. Hadebe and Mr. Seleka relied is Practice Note 1 of 2013/14. Okay? This is Practice Note 3 of 2013, which obviously precedes this instruction note that they refer to. This says that 2003, Practice Note 2003 is still applicable, and you can still remunerate on a risk basis, given you do some stuff. So my first point is, Mr. Chair, is that we are comparing two different, how can I say, enabling or governing documents. So I'm trying to say that at the date when all of this was transpiring, vis-a-vis the actual agreement, this is what National Treasury's view was at the time.
Yes, but I go back to my question. You remember I said in 3 minutes' time you would have made the point. Is your position that you are not able to say whether the conclusion of this agreement without the approvals in terms of the PFMA was lawful or not?
Mr. Chair, in my view, given this email from National Treasury, I believe that Eskom had the required standing to enter into the applicable contract on the applicable basis. Because it is clear that the instruction note is applicable until replaced. And Mr. Chair, at the time, Mr. Chitifango would have been fully aware of the instruction note that Mr. Seleka refers to, because he would have been the person that issued the instruction. It wouldn't have come from anybody else.
So your position is that, as far as you are concerned, it was lawful, it was proper?
Based on this
Based
email,
on this, yeah.
email from...
Okay, all right. Mr. Seleka?
Thank you, Chair. And what Mr. Singh should have read to you, Chair, is the page before,
Yeah,
which is page 12,
yeah.
or 1, paragraph 90. Because they're seeking this thing after they have purported to conclude the agreement. Paragraph 90 says, after the master service agreement was signed, and if you take the allegation that it was concluded in January 2016, Eskom made some attempt to engage with the National Treasury, although no approval was ever secured. Now,
I'm sorry, did you say paragraph 90?
90, yeah, 90.
Oh,
Yes. Because, Chair, remember, as you read,
yes. I think the point you make
yes,
when you refer to this may be saying, but here it is said that no approval was secured.
yes.
But I understand his
Oh.
point to be
Sorry,
different.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry, just before that. That after they signed the agreement, and I should add, purported to conclude the agreement, they then sought, they took this step.
Yeah.
But the contract requires them to do the step before they conclude the agreement.
No, I appreciate that.
Okay.
I'm saying my understanding of what Mr. Singh's view
Yes,
is that he is saying
yes,
you can say whatever you want to say about approvals.
yes,
Here is an email from National Treasury,
yes,
and his understanding of that email is the agreement could be concluded. I think that's his point. So that he says whoever sent the email would have known about whatever requirements. He
Yes.
sent the email.
yes.
As far as Mr. Singh is concerned, everything was proper then.
No, I understand this
And
position.
Mr. Chair, in response to Mr. I agree with you, Mr. Chair, in terms of your proposition.
Articulation of, not my proposal, in
sorry.
terms of what you are saying.
Yes, in terms of what I am saying. But
Yeah.
in addition to that, Mr. Chair, the reason for me to highlight to you the condition in the letter of acceptance is particularly for this reason.
Yeah,
It's because Eskom concluded the letter of acceptance with the view that the National Treasury instruction note was not applicable. The instruction note that Mr. Hadebe and Mr. Seleka relies on. Therefore, that condition found its way there, as ambiguous as it is. So that empowered them to sign on the basis that it was not applicable. To confirm that it was not applicable, they then engaged with Treasury through this process that resulted in Mr. Chief Ifango's response. And that is the position that I take relating to this matter.
yeah, okay.
Okay,
Mr. Seleka.
we can move on. That's Eskom. Mr. Hadebe's position is Eskom's position.
Well, Mr. Chair, I was Eskom at the time as well, at some point as well.
Yeah. But we take note of the fact that you are
So give me a
relying...
contract and I'll go back to Eskom, then I'll give you my official.
Say again?
What, do you want to go back to Eskom?
I was saying to you, I go back to Eskom, then I can give you an official position as well.
Yeah. But yes, no, Mr. Singh, but you have said to the chairperson, you didn't know these things at the time. So you're relying on them now as you see them.
But you are now asking me a question, I'm responding to you.
Yeah. Why did you terminate this agreement, by the way?
Sorry, sir.
The MSA, why did you terminate it? The MSA was meant to be for 3 years. Ms. Goodson, when she starts at Trillion, she's told by Mr. Angel, Clive
Sorry,
Angel.
I was having a sip of water. Sorry, can you repeat?
Okay. I was asking you, why did you terminate this MSA, by the way? Because it was meant to be for 3 years. You terminated it hardly 6 months into it. Meant to be for 3 years, Ms. Goodson said...
Is that hardly 6 months from January 2016 or from October 2016 or from June 2016?
That's correct, Chair. That's because Mr. Singh's version has changed. You know it has evolved over time, Mr. Singh. Your affidavit says January 2016 is the conclusion. Yesterday you were adamant it's 31 March 2016 the conclusion. I don't know on what basis. And then we have Mr. Dr. Weiss saying he only signed in October 2016. But assuming this contract was in place and you purport to terminate it in June 2016, why did you terminate it? Yes.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
firstly,
Let me just understand, when you say why did you terminate, is that you as in Mr. Singh or you as in Eskom?
Well, I think
He made it.
No,
He will clarify. Okay.
Let me
Mr. Singh,
clarify, Chair.
your answer will clarify. We'll see whether you say, why are you asking me? I didn't terminate anything, or whether you'll say, yes, I terminated.
I think Mr. Singh knows.
Mr. Singh?
They made a submission to the BTC with reasons to terminate. So at least that you know, Mr. Singh.
so hence I was going to clarify, Mr. Chair. It's technically correct is to say that I did not terminate.
You did not?
I did not terminate the agreement.
Did not terminate the agreement.
I was not the delegated authority to terminate the agreement. The original decision to enter into the agreement was taken by the board tender committee. So the decision to terminate or otherwise was sent back to the board tender committee, and the board tender committee made its conclusion. Mr. Chair, I think first before we go there, I want to clarify that I'm not too sure where Mr. Seleka gets the changing of my version.
Your voice goes down.
I'm saying I want to clarify that I'm not too sure where Mr. Seleka finds that my versions have been changed. Because if
Well,
you
he
go...
said your affidavit said the contract was concluded in January, and then he said yesterday you said at least 31 March. That's how he sought to back up what he was saying.
Yes, but
Chairperson, sorry to interrupt. This is not what Mr. Singh said yesterday. He never stated categorically that it was terminated by the 31st of March. So to put that proposition...
Not terminated, concluded.
Or concluded, he never said that. It's not what he said, and my learned friend should refrain from putting statements to him that's incorrect.
Well, Mr. Singh can correct him, can say, I didn't say that. That will be...
Hence, that's what I'm saying, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you did not say
I
that.
did not say that, and he knows that. I said in the steering committee meeting of, I think it was the second steering committee, there was a slide there that said by the 31st of March, a contract should be concluded, the contract should be signed. So I said between 31 March and 28 June, at some point in time, this contract was then signed, based on the Eskom version of the facts that were there.
Of course, Mr. Singh, you have to tell the truth, whatever the truth is. Okay. If you were able to say, if having initially said in your affidavit, the contract was concluded in January 2016, and later on you said it was concluded on on the 31st of March 2016. If that is what you said, that version might look in a certain way. The version you're putting now is, or the version now seems to be, yes, in the affidavit I said it was concluded in January 2016. But right now I don't know exactly when it was concluded, somewhere between beginning of 2016 and mid-2016, somewhere there. Am I right?
Well, Mr. Chair, I have a problem with that.
Yes.
Because when I'm requested to comment on a document, and they say, here's a document, what do you have to say about it? So I tell you, based on what I know.
No, I accept that.
No, but let me finish, Chair.
Yes.
Then I get Dr. Weiss that comes in December that says, no, this thing was now concluded in October. Now, I never knew that before that. As I testified, the first time that I came to know that this contract was not signed at any point was when Dr. Weiss declared that.
Yeah.
So
No.
and even when I come here and I say to you, the first thing is, these are not things that were within my purview. They were not within my personal knowledge. However, if you want me to go through them, I will go through them with the information that I have before me, based on what I have seen thus far. If you bring another piece of information to me tomorrow
Might
that
change.
indicates otherwise, then
Yeah.
I concede to the position that I have.
No, I understand.
So it's not evolving on the basis that I am being.
It's the
instructed
changing
or-
information.
It's changing information.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I don't need to belabor the point, but Mr. Singh, you don't need the version of Dr. Weiss to tell the chairperson when, according to your knowledge, the agreement was concluded. Because even with Dr. Weiss's affidavit, you have said it was signed in January 2016. Yesterday, you said because of Dr. Weiss's letter of 28 June, then this agreement must have been signed between March and June 2016.
But Mr. Chair, again, it's coming back to this point of what information is, as I said to you, Mr. Chair, when I came in, the first time I came here and I was presented with this, I think Mr. Seleka asked me, when was this thing signed? Right? And I said, I don't know when this thing was signed, because the first time that I heard of the fact that this thing was not signed was when Dr. Weiss was testifying.
Well,
So-
isn't the fair point to be made, Mr. Singh, the one I think you made yesterday, that you have no personal knowledge of when Mr. Mabalane signed?
That's correct.
Yeah, so you have to look at what information is placed there. You were not there when he signed, so you can't say that's the date when he signed.
And hence, Mr. Chair, I take exception to the fact that Mr. Seleka says that my version is constantly changing.
Yeah,
My version is constantly changing because of the information that's placed before.
yeah.
It's
When
not-
the information changes, you look at it and see how it affects what you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
otherwise
that's-
I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say to you, oh no, it's still signed in January. Yet there's a letter that says it's still in draft.
No, I think, Mr. Singh, the important thing is you did say you have no personal knowledge when it was signed. So the person who can tell us when actually he signed is Mr. Mabalane.
That is correct.
And Dr. Weiss has said in his affidavit when he signed.
Yeah.
We don't have an affidavit from Mr. Mabalane, Mr. Seleka,
We have one
about
which...
when he signed.
No, we're getting one from him, Chair. There's
Yeah.
There's one on the issues, but he doesn't deal
Deal
with
with
this
it.
particular issue.
Yeah.
So we have approached him to address this issue and
Yeah.
other issues.
Yeah, okay, all right. No, that's fine. I think let's move on.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Singh, you didn't mention the reasons why the termination was made.
Well, Mr. Chair, in I think it was the third steering committee meeting related to the Master Services Agreement, as I said yesterday, it was a closed session that was called. relating. Sorry,
Raise
sir.
your voice again.
There was a closed session that was called to discuss the issue of the MSA. And there were the issues relating to the letter that we had discussed yesterday, the 19th of February letter, that we were still considering. And at that stage, there were also, that coincided with that, Mr. Chair, there was a significant amount of focus that National Treasury had started placing on what they call sole source contracts. And sole source basically means contracts that are placed without an open tender. And there was additional guidance, there was additional reporting requirements, there was additional factors to be considered, and so on. So with all of those matters, even, Mr. Chair, the issue of the contract value at that stage also became a little bit more apparent. Because being a risk-based contract, I don't think this contract actually had a value that anyone understood. And I think Ms. Woodson or Ms. Mosila, I think, alluded to the fact that, you know, this contract could be as big as 10 billion or 12 billion or whatever the number was. So all of those factors, Mr. Chair.
It ultimately became 1.6 billion.
Sorry?
It ultimately became 1.6 billion.
No, Mr. Chair, what I'm talking about is the potential, had it lasted 3 years, would have basically gone to at least 10 or 12 billion in terms of the risk-sharing model, and obviously if the benefits had been realized. Given all of these changes, as well as I think Mr. Bamalani at the time added an additional concern that was raised by the external auditors relating to the, I think it was the corporate plan contract or even this contract, I'm not sure, I think it may have been referring to this contract, that they had raised concerns regarding the validity of this contract in terms of it potentially being considered irregular expenditure. So all of those issues, and more particularly, I think the concerns raised by the external auditor, were factored into the decision, and a recommendation was made to the board tender committee to consider its cancellation.
Well, that was a long answer. Is it not possible for you to say the reasons why the contract was terminated were A, B, C?
Okay, Mr. Chair, it was A, the issue of the 19th of February letter that was discussed.
Hang on. What about it? That there had been no compliance or what?
Mr. Chair, there was, as I said yesterday, there was pretty much compliance in terms of the way that they had responded to the letter. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it
you said that they didn't comply completely at some stage, you said so.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, it was more around the substance of the whole program. Because when I received this steering committee mandate, the concerns relating to the 19th of February letter was relating to the program that I had inherited in terms of the steer committee.
Maybe let me ask the question this way so we can eliminate something. Was any of the reasons, assuming there were more, two or more reasons, assuming there were two or more reasons for the termination, was there any reason that was based, that related to what McKinsey had done wrong?
No.
Nothing?
No.
It was just Eskom's own decision based on certain reasons?
Yes.
Okay, what were they? Yeah.
So basically it was, Mr. Chair, if we had to put them in order of importance.
Yeah.
The first one was the external auditor's view. The external audit view on the contract itself.
On the program.
On the program.
Yeah.
In terms of the contract.
Yes.
And its validity and so on. Because if they had an issue with it, Mr. Chair, it would ultimately be flagged as irregular expenditure in terms of the PFMA.
Okay, the external auditors had a view which indicated that there was a risk that they would flag it as an irregularity. Okay, irregular. Yeah, okay, that was one.
That was one. And that flowed, Mr. Chair, from the increased focus that National Treasury was placing on sole source contracts.
Okay.
right? Which either, so they were doing it in two ways. They were doing it firstly in terms of strengthening the processes and procedures and grounds on which you could actually do sole sources into the future.
Yes.
But
So
they
National Treasury was questioning whether there was justification for concluding this contract on a sole source basis.
No, not particularly this one.
Oh, just in
They were
general.
issuing guidance and directives.
general.
In general.
Okay.
That was both backward looking and forward looking. So the forward looking stuff was to say, listen, we want to strengthen this sole source thing because we think it's an area that's being abused. So now instead of just complying with 2 requirements, you now need to comply with 10. Okay? And the backward-looking stuff was to say, listen, we may understand that you've entered into contracts before on sole source basis. Can you give us a report on these on a periodic basis? So there was another level of monitoring that was now happening. So those 2 were the primary
Reasons.
reasons.
Okay. That is the risk that the external auditors could flag it as a regular expenditure.
Irregular expenditure.
2, the requirements placed by National Treasury on the use of sole source contracts, both in terms of forward-looking,
As well as
the kinds of things that they wanted Eskom to do
comply
or
with.
to comply with, and as far as backward-looking, as far as things
Monitoring.
that they wanted to get reports on.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And
Mr.
then, Mr. Chair, obviously the value of the contract,
Yes,
given those 2 issues,
yes,
also became a problem.
okay.
Because-
At that stage, was the value known,
Well, Mr. Chair, given these how can I call it?
requirements?
These developments, then we then had to have an answer in terms of what was this value. Or certainly I didn't know the value at the time. So then the value was then a calculation was done, and then I had an understanding what the value was. And it was in the region of the 10 or 12 billion that has already been
Over
testified
3 years.
over the 3-year period.
Yes,
Given that value with the 2 initial concerns that I raised, it was a bit concerning that we were now entering into this type of contract with this significant exposure, given the reporting requirements and the potential irregular expenditure that this thing could lead to. So those were the primary ones. And as a last one, Mr. Chair, I think we then discussed the issue of the responses that McKinsey had given us, but not in the context of whether McKinsey complied or not. Because as I said yesterday, in principle, they complied with all. They said yes to everything. Right? The discussion was more around how do we actually, if we have an objective of creating top engineers, and if we have an objective of creating empowering consulting or empowered consulting companies, what is the best way to do that? Is it actually to do, a massive contract with one company, or is it better to actually give it to a number of, select 5, or 6, or 7, or whatever the number is, and then try and, get a broader based type of implementation plan for economic empowerment, rather than having, let's say, 1. So that was more the decision. The discussions surrounded more the how can I say, not the, as I said, it was not about McKinsey whether they complied or not. It was more about how does Eskom actually see it actually playing a role in achieving those 2 objectives, whether it be through one big bang approach or whether it be through smaller initiatives.
But as with regard to compliance, while on the one hand you did say yesterday, by virtue of McKinsey's response to your letter of the 19th Feb,
Yes, sir.
you took the view, or Eskom took the view, that they were complying or they had complied. But you did say that later you were not satisfied, or Eskom was not satisfied about at least, I think, one requirement, if I'm not mistaken.
No, Mr. Chair. My feedback to the Commission was, in principle, they had complied in the response to the letter.
Yeah,
But at a subsequent steer call, we had a discussion relating to the letter
yes.
and the elements of the letter,
yes.
which is my
Elements of their response or
of
your
their
letter.
response.
Yes,
And this is the meeting that I was referring to, Mr.
yes,
where we discussed the broader aspects
Yeah.
of how implementation of a program of this nature should be considered,
yes.
given the current environment
Yes.
that we're finding ourselves in.
Yes,
So that was discussed, not the actual compliance or non-compliance of the
yeah,
issues that were listed.
yeah,
Mr. Seleka raised the point that because the BEE question of my letter
had not been
had
finalized.
not been finalized,
Yes,
he then says that could have never been finalized.
yes.
So-
I thought you agreed at some stage with him that that part, namely the issue of SDL,
Yes, sir.
because McKinsey never concluded any agreement with a subcontractor in terms of SDL, then there was no compliance in that regard. But you were saying when Mr. Mabelane signed, you don't know what discussion may have arisen with regard to
Yes.
that,
Yes.
which may have led to him to sign.
Yes.
But you had no personal knowledge yourself that the SDL requirement was met.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chair, that's correct.
Yes.
But the chairperson is also correct in regard to the former part, which is even after they had sent you a response to you, Mr. Singh, later you met at the steering committee and you were not satisfied that they have met all your requests. You did say that yesterday.
Mr. Chair, let's understand this. This issue of the 19th of, as you said yesterday, the 19th of February later
Yeah.
is going to be an infamous one. I understand Mr. Seleka's point of view in terms of focusing on the 19th of February. But Mr. Chair, and again, it is a point that the board tender committee delegated to the Group Executive Technology and Commercial.
No, but Chair, can I ask
No,
Mr. Singh?
let me
Mr.
finish.
Singh,
Hang hang on, Mr. Singh. Mr. Seleka thinks you might not be going towards responding to his question.
No, I'm
I just
going to
want
respond
to
to his
understand. Yes, Mr. Seleka.
Chairperson, we have put to Mr. Singh what we remember he said yesterday.
Yes.
He needs to say, yes, that's what I said,
it,
or that's
no,
not what I
don't.
said.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Do you want to repeat the question?
That's not what I said.
Chairperson,
Hang on 1 second. Just repeat the question and then you answer, Mr.
Yes. What we remember Mr. Singh saying is that they did respond to him. He wrote a letter with those bullet points that the signing of the proposed agreement is contingent upon the successful response to this. They responded, and you said, however, after the response, you had a steering committee, and you were not satisfied that they have successfully satisfied all your requests. That's what you said. And then I said, well, that's the one part, Mr. Singh. The last part is what the chairperson said to you. Then I went further to say, I can even tell you there's one in particular which was not satisfied. And that was the SDL.
Mr. Chair, that's not what I said.
Hang on, Mr. Singh. You said your question seeks to get confirmation from him or agreement whether he said something or not. What is it that you want
Correct,
to
which is,
confirm?
Chair, that even after they had received the responses from McKinsey, in a subsequent meeting of steering committee, the steering committee was not completely satisfied that they have answered all the requests.
Did you say that yesterday, Mr. Singh?
Mr. Chair, I would ask for Mr. Seleka to clarify what he's actually asking. In what he asked me 2 minutes ago and what he's asked me now, there's a difference.
Just focus on the last one. He says he understood you to say yesterday, although when you had looked at McKinsey's response to your letter, you had thought that McKinsey had satisfied the requirements.
Yes, sir.
Subsequently, in a meeting, I think you said it of the steering committee,
yes.
in a subsequent meeting of the steering committee, the matter was discussed, and you, that is the committee, I think, was not satisfied that McKinsey had satisfied all the requirements. So he wants you to confirm whether his recollection of what you said is correct or not.
Yes.
So it is correct to the extent that I was clarifying yesterday even the context within which this steering committee discussion was happening. And I've clarified today because you've allowed me the opportunity to clarify.
No, that's fine. At least that's clarified,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take the
Shall we take the...
tea break. I don't know whether the pace is fine. I have a feeling the pace is not as good as it should be, but you know better because you
Yes.
in terms of what still needs to be dealt with in terms of Tegeta. But
Yes, Chair.
in the end, we seek to strike a balance between doing justice to the issues and not being too slow. So,
Aye.
but let's take the tea break, and then when we resume, if there is still something to finalize on the MSA, you'll do so. But we do need to get to Tegeta as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 20 past. We'll take the tea adjournment. We'll resume at 25 to 12.
Thank you.
We adjourn. Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Singh, let me, time is the enemy at this stage. I think we are enjoying your evidence, but we'll have to approach it differently. So the termination is done 16 June, by letter dated 16 June 2016, for the reasons that you have articulated. Those reasons, Chairperson, are found in the minutes, well, not to the extent you have mentioned them, the minutes of Steerco you've mentioned, but also in the submission that was made to the BTC. Those are in the bundle, Chair. Can you explain to the Chairperson, Mr. Singh, after the termination in June, there was a meeting with the meeting of the Steer Committee, at least in August 2016, which still included Trillian and McKinsey. What was the reason for that further engagement with them?
Just lost you at the last bit.
What was the reason for further engaging with Trillian and McKinsey after the termination of the MSA, or purported termination on the 16th of June 2016?
Mr. Chair, once the termination was communicated to McKinsey, there was an understanding that, well, not understanding, an agreement, that it would make logical sense for the programs to reach a logical endpoint, or not programs, initiatives within the program, to reach a logical conclusion, if you want to call it that, that were already in progress. So that date...
So in other words, there was an agreement that certain work that was in progress should be finalized.
Would be finalized, and no new initiatives would be undertaken.
Yes, yeah, okay.
And I think that date, I think, Mr. Chair, was around somewhere in July or August, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm. Yeah, the last meeting, as we have it, is the 4th of August, 2016. Okay. When Ms. Motepu was here, she testified that when McKinsey decided to terminate further discussions with Trillian for the purposes of considering them as a subcontractor in respect of MSA, you were unhappy with that termination, and you asked McKinsey to give Trillian more time to provide them with documentation that was required in regard to BEE and ownership of the entity. But McKinsey was steadfast in their position. What is your comment in regard to her version, that you were unhappy with that decision?
Mr. Chair, as I've testified before, I think, Mr. Chair, the choice of a subcontractor is the prerogative of the main contractor. Eskom is a recipient of that outcome. I don't recall being unhappy with McKinsey's view. As Dr. Weiss has testified, we requested that they provide us alternatives in terms of being able to onboard a new supply development partner.
Face the chairperson. Yeah. Did you hear, Chair?
I did.
Sorry,
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, that's fine. Recall again that that letter of the 19th of February specifically mentioned the BEE partner, in brackets, Regiment's group. And in response to that letter, McKinsey indicated that they will not subcontract with Regiment, but they will consider Trillion, which was at the time under review. Is there a reason why? Well, I know you dealt with, I think you were explaining the reason why you specified regiments yesterday. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, I don't know. I was not trying to specify. All I was trying to do yesterday was to reference to the fact that the opening paragraph refers to the regiment's group, and then the second sentence in the paragraph relates to incorporating or ultimately moving over to Trillion.
Yes, but not those paragraphs. I'm talking about your requests to Trillion. To McKinsey. Number 4 was about the development of a BEE partner, bracket regiment's group, close bracket, as regards the vision aspirations. Yes. Remember that?
Yeah, that's I'm responding to that, sir.
Okay.
I'm saying I cannot remember why regiment's group was put into paragraph 4 specifically.
You can't remember, okay.
But I did comment on the fact that the opening paragraph, the first 2 sentences of the opening paragraphs of the letter refers to regiment's group and then ultimately transitioning to Trillion. I think that's what the letter says.
Yes, correct, the opening statement. I'm just dealing with a slightly different matter. And let me go further on that, because when I read the affidavit of Dr. Wise and Mr. Amankua, I see something to the effect, and I want you to comment on that you would have been the one who introduced or suggested to McKinsey to subcontract regiments. Firstly, when you were at Transnet, and secondly, when they were at Eskom. I'm going to read to you. You can go to, Chair, we can go to the affidavit of, firstly, Mr. Amankua, Eskom Bundle 14, bracket C. Bracket C, page 702.210. Assist Mr. Singh there.
Oh, it's me.
What's the page?
702.210.
702.210.
Correct, sir. Paragraph 19.1.
19.1.
Yes. You have it there, Mr. Singh?
Sorry, I do.
19.1. Mr. Amankwa. When the above described issues and conflict developed with Letsema, are you there? McKinsey began looking for a new supplier development partner for its work at Transnet. In discussing potential alternatives to Letsema, Mr. Singh of Transnet noted the fact that regiments had performed well for Transnet in past work that regiments had done for Transnet Treasury function. Regiment's prior work with Transnet was documented at the time in the company profile that was given to McKinsey, as well as in proposals submitted by McKinsey and regiments to Transnet. Do you have a comment on this? Mr. Singh?
Sorry, Chair.
Do you have a comment on this?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to think what's the best way to respond to this thing. Mr. Chair, Mr. Amankua's version of events is very far from reality. As I had no such interactions with suggesting regiments as a subcontractor to McKinsey at any time.
Okay.
Actually, to be quite honest, Mr. Chair, the transcripts of Dr. Fine goes into great detail as to how regiments actually ended up being a subcontractor of McKinsey. And if you want to go there, we can go there. I think we should go there.
No, it's fine.
No, 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 we
That's
should go
your
there.
response
No, I think I'm going to go there, because this is an
to
issue
Dr.
that,
Fine's transcripts.
or his affidavit, because I'm sure he's covering it in his affidavit as well.
Oh, we don't have it here.
Mr. Chair, this is
And
going to be a...
what did you say Dr. Fine's affidavit or evidence says?
Mr. Chair, Dr. Fine basically goes through a process of explaining how regiments was introduced to
Eskom. McKinsey.
to McKinsey,
Yeah.
because Mr. Amankua's allegation is that I suggested to McKinsey that they should use regiments.
Yes, okay.
Okay? So firstly, I'm saying Mr. Amankua's allegation is not based in fact. He doesn't support this allegation with any piece of paper. Secondly, I'm saying that both Dr. Fine and Dr. Weiss go through some level of detail in terms of how regiments became a subcontractor of
I think I've seen something along those lines
Yes.
in one of the affidavits.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was part of the money stream. Dr. Weiss, Dr. Fine, and Ms. Zala were on the same day.
Yeah. Dr. Weiss affidavit, do we have? We had it
Yes.
yesterday.
Yes, we do have it, Chair.
Yeah.
I also have a,
Yeah. Can we go to where
Before we
he
go there,
does so? Can we go where Dr. Weiss gives a background of how regiments was introduced to McKinsey?
yes.
If everyone's understanding is that he does do that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm on that page, Chair.
Oh, okay, maybe you can
Page.
read it. Or page, yeah?
Yes, I need us to go there because I have another question.
Yeah.
No, so I haven't finished with this one.
Yes, but let's go there. You will continue. Let's go to that page where Dr. Weiss deals with how regiments was introduced to McKinsey. Because you said Dr. Fine or Dr. Weiss, Mr. Singh, is that right? You said both of them deal at length with how regiments got to work with McKinsey.
I think Dr. Weiss does deal with some of the aspects relating to Transnet,
Yes,
and then Dr. Fine deals with it in greater detail.
yes.
Yes.
Is it fine if we go to whichever one of them, or you want us to go to both?
Mr. Chair, I think for present purposes, maybe the one for Dr. Fine is probably better.
Okay, all right. Do we have Dr. Fine's affidavit?
Not that one, Chair.
Yeah.
Not in the bundles.
Okay.
Yes.
Not in any of the bundles that you have,
No.
but it can be found somewhere, or we don't have it at all?
No, we can find it.
Okay,
We can
maybe it
find
can
it.
be found for later then.
Yes. No,
Yeah,
we can
we'll
find
come
it.
back to it.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, yes, continue, Mr. Singh.
Lastly, Mr. Chair, I think in one of my affidavits, I attach a letter that, and again, Mr. Chair, forgive us, but we're responding to a matter that relates to Transnet now, because this is where he's alleging this happened. And the letter that I sent to McKinsey clearly states, and I think it's a 19th of June letter, 20-something, and I think it's in one of our affidavits.
So you would have sent it while you were still at
At
Transnet?
Transnet.
Yes, okay.
And it clearly states that Transnet accepts regiments as a subcontractor to one of the contracts. I think it was a transaction advisor contract that we had awarded to them, based on regiment's recommendations of regiments as a subcontractor.
Okay, do you remember where we can find your letter?
That we can just check for, and in one of my affidavits we've got this.
Okay.
But-
Okay,
Yeah.
if it's not found now, we can come back to it later
it's-
when
Yes.
somebody has found it.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll find it, Mr.
let's
Singh.
continue in the meantime, we'll come back to it once somebody has found it.
Yeah. But if you read this affidavit of Mr. Amankwa, Mr. Singh, is that not after the fact? Because when you read the affidavit, there seems to be a proposal by you that regiments should be McKinsey subcontractor, and then a document is provided to them. He says, regiment's prior work with Transnet was documented at the time in the company profile that was given to McKinsey. And I don't know. And then as a result of that, they would then put a proposal to Transnet. I'm printed the picture, you can comment on it. Then they would put the proposal to Transnet with regiment as the proposed subcontract. Then you write that letter. Is that not how it happened?
Mr. Chair, I think maybe we should introduce into the records the money flow session that will clarify these questions. The presentation that Mr. Amankua is referring to, I can only believe, relates to the presentation that was provided to Mr. Sega, that then provided it to McKinsey. And Mr. Sega would have received that from regiments. Why that is being associated with me in any way, shape, or form, I do not understand. Yet the money flow work stream has led evidence and has received the exact feedback that I just gave you through an evidence leader of your own.
Okay, let's go to Dr. Weiss's affidavit. In the same bundle, page 693.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just before we move off this, Mr. Amankua's affidavit. If you look at paragraph 19.3, as noted by Dr. Fine in his testimony before Parliament, McKinsey conducted a basic due diligence of regiments prior to working with them in Transnet. Now, if you compare that to Dr. Weiss's testimony and his transcripts and Dr. Fine's testimony and transcripts, you'd find that I don't think they said that they did a basic due diligence.
They did.
I'm saying you will find that I don't think they will concur that a basic due diligence on regiments was done, as alluded to by Mr. Amankua in paragraph 19.3.
Okay.
Can I move on?
You can.
Okay. Dr. Weiss's affidavit, page 693. 693. Paragraph 44. You there, Chairperson?
Yes.
Yes, paragraph 44. This is Dr. Weiss's affidavit. He says, I understand from my McKinsey colleagues that Mr. Singh had spoken positively about engaging regiments at Eskom based on his experience with their work at Transnet. He then goes on to say it was not unusual, in my experience, for executives to develop opinions on particular firms based on the work they did, and to seek to engage firms that had performed well for subsequent projects. So there again, seems to be the same theme that you spoke well about, or positively, about engaging regiments.
Mr. Chair, again, I'm not too sure what really turns on this, but at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, I spoke positively of all and any firms that engaged with me that actually did well. So if it was regiments or Letsema or PwC or Deloitte or JP Morgan or whoever, if they set out to do what they were asked to do and they did it properly, then yes, if there's a recommendation to be made, a recommendation will be made. And as Mr. Weiss actually concedes, he didn't see any issues with it because it is a normal thing to happen. Did I say this with a specific intention of them engaging regiments or Trillion as a subcontractor? No. They of their own, Dr. Weiss and Dr. Fine. Dr. Fine asserts to their credentials at Transnet. Dr. Weiss relies on those credentials that they had obtained at Transnet. to engage with them in Eskom. So, Mr. Chair, on their own version, on McKinsey's own version, they were the ones that decided who came across. I did not in any way, shape, or form influence anybody to do anything at any stage.
So you were familiar with regiments from your Transnet days?
Yes, sir.
You were familiar with Dr. Eric Root?
Yes.
That was quite...
Sorry, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
You were familiar with Mr. Salim Essa?
Not as it relates to regiments, no.
Not?
Not as it relates to any relations that he may or may not have had with the regiment.
So in what relation were you familiar with?
Mr. Chair, as I testified before the Commission under the Transnet work stream, I had occasion to meet Mr. Essa once or twice. But that was...
While you were at Transnet?
Yes, while I was.
Okay. So do you remember which year was that?
I think, Mr. Chair, you asked me that question last time. And I said to you I would be guessing if I knew, but I think I gave you a date.
Okay, well, I can't remember.
Yeah, I think if memory serves, I think I gave you a date of 2012 or 2013.
Okay, okay. So between 2012, 2013 or thereabouts, until you left Transnet, you had met him once or twice?
Yes.
Okay. Is that in functions or privately or...
No, Mr. Chair,
Transnet?
as I testified before, it was
There was the occasion when... Was there an occasion when he was either your office at Transnet or somebody, or Mr. Gama's office?
No. Mr. Okay.
That was Mr. Gama's evidence?
That was Mr. Gama's evidence of him meeting Mr. Essa in my office.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So that was one of the two?
No.
Oh, no, not the...
So, yeah, we'll deal with Mr. Gama's evidence later.
Yes, okay. But you say from around 2012 or 13 up to the time you left Transnet, you had met him once or twice?
Once or twice.
Okay, all right. Mr. Selega?
You came to know him as the majority shareholder in Trillion when you were at Eskom?
I got to know that through the process of the McKinsey process. When they became aware of the fact that Dr. Wood was engaging with Mr. Essa, and Mr. Essa was, in fact, the majority shareholder.
It has been testified here that he was essentially the rainmaker for Trillion. He would get Trillion to be to get a contract with a SOE or a state entity, and he would get a major contracting party for Trillion to be subcontracted to, or for regiments to be subcontracted. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Can I go back to your one or two occasions with him while you were at Transnet?
Yes.
Were those business encounters, or was it just...
No, as I testified...
And were they planned, or were they not planned?
I'm not too sure, Mr. Chair. Well, as I said, it's a very long time ago, so I'm struggling to recall, but I do recall that I did meet him. But they were business-related.
They were business-related.
I think he was looking to promote his business at the time. And I think he introduced himself, he introduced his business credentials, and as I testified the last time, I think he had interest in oil and gas or something or the other at that time. And I think that was the extent of our engagement.
I may be wrong, but I seem to remember that last time when you talked about your encounter with him, or one of your encounters with him, it was outside Transnet.
It was not at the office. No.
It was not at the office, yeah. On both occasions, if it's two or not one, Or you,
Mr. Chair, I don't remember.
you can't remember?
I certainly do not remember.
Yeah, you know that one of them, if there were two encounters, one of them was not in the office.
No, Mr. Chair, I certainly do not recall
Oh, okay.
having Mr. Essa or entertaining Mr. Essa at my office.
In your office,
for,
okay.
For any meeting.
Okay.
So if it was one, it was outside. If it was two, it was outside.
Okay, okay, all right.
The commission,
I'm sorry, Mr. Seleka. And did you say those were not planned meetings? So in the sense that maybe you bumped into him or it was some function and he was one of the people in the function?
No.
Or there was an arrangement to meet?
No, it was a set. It was a.
It was an arrangement to meet, okay. And it would have been the two of you only? Or you can't remember?
If I recall, it was only the two of us. I didn't recall.
Okay, no, that's fine. Mr. Seleka?
yes, Mr. Singh is meeting with you as the CFO of Transnet
Yes,
in these meetings.
yes.
But why meeting you?
I don't know.
Did you not ask him?
Well, these meetings are set up, and my office sets them up, and if they are set up, then I attend it to understand what people would like to tell me.
No, Mr. Singh. I mean, you are a CFO of Transnet, a very big state-owned entity. You're not going to just go to any meeting as if you are not busy.
No,
You are only going to go to a meeting if, when you look at the reason for the meeting, you think it's important, isn't it?
Well, Mr. Chair, as I said, this is like stuff that you're asking that's 8 years ago, Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
I said these are meetings that you asked that happened 8 years ago. I don't even know what the document was that he even brought to the meeting. So it would be highly irregular of me to say, well, I went to meet him for this specific reason. If I met him on 15 occasions, I could tell you. I met him on 15 occasions because there was a common theme for us to meet. But in this case, it was an arbitrary 1 or 2 meetings. So for me to remember why I met someone 8 years ago for a single meeting.
Well, it may well be that if it was a single meeting, you would remember than if it was many meetings, but it may be that if it was many meetings but only one theme ran through, then maybe, you know. But you are saying you can't remember now what the reason was, but you accept that you must have known then what the reason was. Okay, Mr. Seleka.
Yeah. So I see the screens are off. I don't know whether the light broadcast is interrupted.
The technicians should tell us if there is a problem.
Reverend is not here.
The Reverend is not here.
Yeah.
I think somebody will tell us just now.
Should we proceed? Okay. He
We
says
may
we can
proceed.
proceed.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Mr. Singh, prior to your secondment to Transnet, Miss Tsolofelo Molefe was there. She was approached or introduced by one of her colleagues, Mr. Colin Machila, to Mr. Salim Essa, who said there's a company, Regiments, that can help Eskom with cash unlocking initiatives in their balance sheet. Salim Essa and Mr. Eric Wood, through Regiments, they couldn't get what they wanted at Eskom at the time. We know that Ms. Molefe says she suspects, because of her resistance to their proposal, it might have been the reason why she was suspended and ultimately terminated at Eskom or separated from Eskom. You have conceded that you in fact engaged McKinsey and Regiments for your onboarding at Eskom, even before your official start on the 1st of August, 2015. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, we considered that the onboarding was arranged and at the behest of McKinsey. And Mr. Chair, also, when we look at this context of the onboarding meetings happening before my appointment at Eskom, Mr. Chair, we've included in the affidavit that we've submitted yesterday the official announcement of my appointment at Eskom. And that was done, I think, on the 16th of July.
Did you say beginning of July?
16th of July.
On the 16th of July?
July 2015.
Okay.
And that was announced by the board of Eskom on that date. So,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, in the context of these onboarding sessions, given the fact that the announcement of my appointment was made on the 16th of July, I don't believe that they're actually irregular or there was anything untoward. As Dr. Weiss has testified.
Please speak up a bit.
Oh, sorry. As Dr. Weiss has testified, it's a normal thing that they did with Ms. Solefele Molefe as well at the time. They did it to all the CEOs, they did it to all the CFOs. They would have done it to other group executives as well. So, but anyway.
Doing what?
The onboarding, Mr. Chair. The onboarding activities.
Well, let's understand what you're talking about. What do you mean when you say onboarding? I mean, if you are being seconded to Eskom, your own onboarding or McKinsey's onboarding, which one are you talking about?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Seleka refers to these meetings that
happened before
prior to my
assumed
role
at Eskom.
To Eskom. So I'm just putting in context that the meetings happened in the context of McKinsey's onboarding of myself relating to my role at Eskom.
Yes, well, I don't know what you and Mr. Seleka, how you and Mr. Seleka are using the term onboarding. If I would understand if you talk about your own onboarding at Eskom, but then if you talk about your own onboarding at Eskom, I would expect that to be done by Eskom officials onboarding you. If you talk about McKinsey's onboarding at Eskom, I would expect that to be done by Eskom officials. It may well be that for some reason, when it was known that you would be going to Eskom, you could be included. But I'm not sure now, when both of you talk about onboarding, whose onboarding you're talking about.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'm putting it in Mr. Singh's inverted commas. Insofar as he said it was his own onboarding, that's what I'm saying to you.
Oh, he has used the term.
So, yes, he has used that term.
Okay.
But we know that the evidence we received from the witness goes wider than that.
Yeah.
But I'm only being specific to what he said. I'm using his concept and he will explain it to the judge.
Well, maybe let's start here, Mr. Singh. Insofar as you may be talking about your own onboarding at Eskom, you have heard what my understanding would be if you talk about your onboarding. Is your understanding different from mine?
Well, Mr. Chair, let's put it this way. The word onboarding, I import from Dr. Weiss's transcript, because he deals with what he refers to as these onboarding sessions. Right?
And does he is it clear from his evidence who he was saying was being onboarded, McKinsey or yourself?
It is a McKinsey term that is used to, how can I say?
Or are they saying they were onboarding you at Eskom?
That's basically what it is, Mr. Chair. And that was the context of these meetings.
Yeah, no, well, I would expect Eskom officials to onboard you.
No, as I explained to you previously.
But that's his term.
Yes. But as I explained to you, Mr. Chair, previously, there were also those sessions that happened where Eskom individuals onboarded myself while I got.
Yeah. But basically, from my understanding, my recollection of the evidence, really there was nothing about onboarding in those discussions, as far as in terms of my own understanding of onboarding. The discussions seem largely to have been about this is what we have in mind for Eskom. You are going to be CFO of Eskom. What's your take on this and that and that? And you gave your take.
No, Mr. Chair, I think you have a incorrect recollection.
Is that so?
Yes.
Okay.
The onboarding sessions, Mr. Chair, where and maybe we should put this into context, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
We have an organization that is in crisis. We alluded to the fact previously that in January of 2015, they had a liquidity crisis. They had load shedding. Their energy availability factors were like at 69%. Their coal prices were escalating at around 18%, when inflation was around 4 to 5%. Their new build program was 1, unfunded, and 2, behind schedule. And their budgets were uncontrollable. They were burning diesel at a rate of R1 billion a month. So, Mr. Chair, that's the environment within which I was finding myself. So, these onboarding sessions sought to elevate those issues. Say, these are the issues that you're going to be dealing with. These are the issues that we believe cause these things. So when you get there, be in a position to deal with them. Because these are the root causes of these issues.
Yeah. Okay. What does remain strange, of course, is why that should be done by an outsider. And that's a point that I may have made last time, you know.
Yeah, but
Why that should not be done by Eskom officials who are already at Eskom, for somebody who is at Transnet but who will be joining them as
But
their
Mr. Chair,
colleague.
with respect, Mr. Chair, I dealt with that matter, and even Dr. Weiss on his own affidavit concedes that this is a normal practice to happen.
Why is it normal for an outsider to, if I have a house, I have a family, and somebody is going to join us and stay with us, why must somebody else, not from this family, prepare him to say, when you stay with these people, with the Zondos, this is what you must be ready for? Why must it not be done by me?
Well, sometimes that's why you need family counseling, sir.
No, it's a strange thing. But anyway, you have said what those sessions were about, Mr. Slega.
Yes. Mr. Singh, it's interesting that the concept, you don't seem to own that concept. So what do you call what they were doing with you in the sessions? You say it's McKinsey's concept, but what do you say?
No,
It
I
is.
said, I didn't say it's McKinsey's concept. I said I imported Dr. Weiss's word, which was onboarding sessions. I said onboarding sessions are normal. I've had sessions with a number of people that brought new concepts, that wanted to talk about Transnet issues. In all of those things, those are in some way, shape, or form onboarding sessions.
Yeah, but just lastly, I think your explanation of what they were saying to you is exactly what how the chairperson was explaining it. They were pinpointing what you say they perceive to be challenges at Eskom, and we know from regiments, Ms. Motepu, that they were making proposals to you. And some of the proposals you will not accept, and you do the changes, and you would then say, yeah, this is what I want to focus on.
Yeah, but not in July.
Not in July.
Not in July.
When?
Whenever it happened, I don't know when it happened, but it was certainly not in July. There was no negotiations that were happening.
But
at
if you
the
don't know
sessions.
when, how do you deny July?
Because the sessions in July did not have initiatives that said, let's do this, let's do this. let's do this.
Chairperson, sorry to interrupt. Maybe
So-
if,
Sorry?
thank you, Chairperson. Maybe if Mr. Seleka knows when this happened, he should put it to the witness. If he's interrogating that issue, say to Mr. Singh, on this day and this day, according to Ms. Mosile Motepu, this is what happened. Let him then comment on those dates, not speculate.
But we do know that Ms. Mutepu said it was either June or July.
June.
I think she said June.
Yes.
And Mr. Singh would remember, Mr. Singh said, no, it was not June, it was July.
In terms of the meetings.
In terms of the meetings,
Yes.
yeah.
And then Mr. Seleka puts to me that Ms. Motepo says that I was negotiating. So I'm asking, when was I negotiating? When was I putting these things in or taking them out?
No. Mr. Seleka hasn't talked about negotiating now.
Yes.
He did talk about negotiating then. But all he is saying now, he says, Ms. Mutepu said, in those meetings, the McKinsey people were making certain proposals for you to comment on. And she said you were indicating those that you were not happy with and indicating what you had no problem with. That's what Mr. Seleka says Ms. Mutepu said. Are you saying that that is not true as far as you are concerned in terms of the July meetings?
Mr. Chair, I will repeat once again, as I've done before, that this Ms. Motepo's recollection is incorrect. Because if, let's for 1 minute suggest that Ms. Motepo...
In terms of the content of the discussion as opposed to the month, you already said June is wrong.
Well, Mr. Chair, let's deal with June. Let's not deal with any other point.
Yeah.
Because if Motepo's evidence is that I was doing this in June.
No, we are done with that. You did deny that.
No, let's say July. Right?
Yeah,
Let's deal
you
with July.
said meetings happened in July.
Let's
Yeah.
deal with the content of the July meeting. So am I to understand, Ms. Motepo is saying that in July, McKinsey made proposals which I then rejected, and I requested other things to be put in. Is that what the contention?
I don't know whether that's a contention.
No,
I'm
but
just
what is
putting
there,
to
sir?
you her version.
No, so what is her version?
Exactly what you've said.
Okay. So in that case, Mr. Chair, I deny that version.
Yes. Is there a time when you say that did happen if it didn't happen in July? Or are you saying it never happened even after
No,
July?
Mr. Chair, post that, for example, I was requested to comment in an affidavit, in a 3-3 notice or a 10-6 notice, around the fact that there was an email that I sent to Mr. Wood requesting him to look at some Duva insurance claim, for example. So that was a request that I made to them. So I made the request.
So is the difference therefore between your version and Ms. Motepu's version in this regard, apart from whether it was in June, whether the meetings were in June or July, is the difference that you accept that at some stage in your interactions with McKinsey, there was a time where they would make proposals and you would examine them, their merits and demerits, accept some of their proposals, reject some, but you say that happened after you had assumed duty at Eskom and not before. And to the extent that she says that happened before you assumed duty, you deny that part.
That is correct.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't go to Dr. Wise about negotiations because he puts it in May, June, that they started around there. And that was specifically about the negotiations. Mr. Singh, zooming back on Mr. Salim Essa, you would have seen the travel agents' affidavits, in which they say you were introduced to them Mr. Salim Essa in 2014. What is your comment on that?
I have no recollection of that, Mr. Chair. I don't recall Mr. Essa ever introducing me to a travel agent. I used a number of travel agents to travel. Travel Excellence was one of them.
Travel Excellence is one of them.
It says Travel Excellence was not one of them. Is that right?
No, I'm saying
No.
Mr.
You say
Travel
was one of
Yes,
them?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you recall how you came to do business with them, or can you not recall how that came about?
No, Mr. Chair, I can't. My PA normally did lots of stuff for me in my personal capacity. So it may have been her that recommended them. I'm not too sure.
Oh, okay. Do you have a recollection of when you may have started using them?
No, Mr. Chair.
Even in terms of year, you can't remember. Okay, all right. But it would not have been before 2010, for example?
Not from, no,
No,
Mr.
it would have been after.
Certainly, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Salega?
And you have seen that they say they did your flight bookings from 2014. There's 3 flight bookings in 2014, 3 flight bookings in
Do you want to refer us to where that is?
Yes,
Mr. Salega?
I can certainly do that. Eskom, this is Eskom Bundle 18, bracket B.
Mr. Salega, let's take a 7 minutes break. Just a short adjournment. Let's adjourn.
Okay.
Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. The affidavit is found in Eskom Bundle 18, bracket B, page 1565.1.
Yes, that's the affidavit of Samira Suleiman.
That's correct.
Okay,
Samira Suleiman, an adult female, employed as a travel agent working at Double Excellence, trading as Travel Excellence. And the relevant passages in relation to Mr. Singh are from page 1565.4. Are you there, Mr. Singh?
Yes, sir.
So my summary was based on this. Mr. Essa introduced Mr. Anoj Singh, paragraph 20. Introduced Mr. Singh to me during 2014. I had never met Mr. Singh before then. From there onwards, we had received requests from either Mr. Singh or Mr. Essa or from Mr. Singh directly to book flights for them. The charges were always allocated.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lega, I think you should start with what she says her relationship was with Mr. Salim Essa
Okay, sure.
before you go to where she says Mr. Essa introduced Mr. Anoj Singh to her.
Certainly, Chair. That's on page 1565.3 under the heading Relationship with Salim Essa. And I start at paragraph 15. She writes, whilst I was employed at Harvey World, I was introduced to Mr. Salim Essa, whom I then serviced as a client. After a while, many of the employees, including myself, were let to go from Harvey World.
And I think she explains earlier that Harvey Welt was also a travel agent, isn't it? Agency, or not?
You mean earlier in the affidavit, Chair?
Earlier in the affidavit, does she not explain that Harvey Welt was also a travel agency?
Yes. That is on the page before, the preceding page, 1565.2. At the top of the page, background to my relationship with Miss Halima Alana. Both I and Miss Halima Alana have been working in the travel industry for the last 30 years. At a point in time, both I and Miss Alana worked together at a travel agency called Shore Freeway Travel. I later went on to join a travel agency named Harvey World Travel, and Miss Alana left to start up her own travel agency.
Yeah, okay.
Is that sufficient?
Yeah, that's sufficient.
Yeah. And then going back to page 1565.3, paragraph 16.
Oh, then just to connect everything properly, then she says, in 15, whilst I was employed at Harvey Well,
Correct, yes.
I was introduced to Mr. Salim Essa, Mr. Essa, whom I then serviced as a client.
Yes.
And then take it from there.
Yes. After a while, many of the employees, including myself, were let go from Harvey World. I then contacted Ms. Alana and joined her at Travel Excellence around June 2013. Mr. Essa, being my client, followed me to Travel Excellence. At Travel Excellence, I usually dealt with Mr. Essa directly. I do not believe Ms. Alana ever dealt with him directly. Although both Ms. Alana and I have access to each other's mailboxes to ensure that we are able to speedily respond to the requests from clients. Mr. Essa had a standing account with us, account number C00365.
No. You've got
Or 00.
less zeros than.
Yes, sorry.
It's
Chair.
C000365.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Essa would usually either send me an email or he would phone me with a request for bookings. Although Mr. Essa frequently requested us to book tickets for other people, we always allocated the transactions to his account as we considered him the guarantor for all such travel bookings. Mr. Essa usually corresponded with us being either his Salim Essa at gmail.com or Salim at global.co.za email address. Mr. Essa's secretary also frequently corresponded with us using the Salim at global.co.za email address. I unfortunately cannot remember her name. And then the next heading is travel arrangements for Mr. Anoj Singh. I suppose Mr. Anoj Singh will have no knowledge of that information I've read.
How the two of them met and what arrangements they had. You wouldn't know anything about that. Or would you?
No, sir.
Okay.
But do you know the Mr. Salima?
Sorry.
Do you know Mr. Samira Suleiman,
I do, Mr. Chair.
the deponent?
Okay.
Then travel arrangements for Mr. Anoj Singh, paragraph 20. So Mr. Essa introduced Mr. Anoj Singh to me during 2014. I had never met Mr. Singh before then. From there onwards, we had received requests from either Mr. Essa or from Mr. Singh directly to book flights for them. The charges were always allocated to Mr. Essa's account number C000365. I set out below, as per my records and recollection, the bookings made for Mr. Singh since 2014. 22.1. A booking was requested for Mr. Singh to fly from Dubai to Johannesburg on 8 June 2014. I cannot recall who made the request. Mr. Singh was issued with ticket number 487-5955-176. I do not know how Mr. Singh flew to Dubai. The total cost charged was 9,100 rand. The invoice was addressed to Mr. Singh, although it was charged to Mr. Essa's account. I cannot recall whether I spoke to Mr. Essa or Mr. Singh, but one of the two gentlemen phoned me to tell me a driver would be dropping off money in cash to settle the invoice, which indeed took place. I attach here to the cash receipt dated 16 July 2014. I subsequently deposited the money into our bank account on the same day. Mr. Singh, are you able to confirm this
Chairperson,
or comment on it?
before we continue with this, there's an issue that I'd like to raise
Yeah.
vis-a-vis the aspect of the, and I know you're entitled to listen to hearsay evidence, but it relates directly to the issue of what she says about Mr. Essa. And maybe it would be appropriate to first deal with my learned friend on that issue before I place it on record, because most probably, taking into account the way that the Commission's investigators should operate, I would assume they've done it. So if, and I hate to ask for 2 or 3 minutes, but let me first deal with Mr. Seleka to try and see if it's done, and then I will take an instruction as to how to deal with that particular issue. Because I think you can understand it impacts certain issues directly relating to my client.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Seleka?
Chair,
I
think the
I think
request-
you were saying you would deal with that later, is that right?
No, Chairperson, I think I want to ask my learned friend about it now.
Oh, you-
Because I need to understand if something
you want-
has been done.
You would like an adjournment?
I like a very brief
3
adjournment.
minutes, oh, okay, no, that's fine. let's take, well, it might affect, because I think you are saying it might affect a lot of things. Okay, let's take that short adjournment. We are at nearly 1:45. Okay, let's take the short adjournment, 5 minutes. We adjourn. Okay, we are at 5 to 1, but maybe let's do about 10 minutes or so,
Yes.
or 15 minutes, and then we take the lunch break.
Yes.
Okay.
So I should accept that we have addressed or to move forward. If not addressed, but we've agreed to move forward.
Okay, yeah, I think counsel for Mr. Singh nods. Yeah, okay, all right.
Thank you. Where's my phone? Mr. Singh, I was reading from that file 18. Eskom bundle 18, bracket B, page 1565.4. I have read paragraph 22 with 22.1, which is a booking request made for Mr. Singh to fly from Dubai to Johannesburg on 8 June 2014. I cannot recall who made the request. Mr. Singh was issued with ticket number, and I've read that. I do not know.
I'm sorry, you had read 22.1, and Mr. Singh was about to respond
Correction.
to it. Do you want to respond or comment, Mr. Singh?
Mr. Singh, I think,
Yeah, Mr. Singh.
I'm doing the same thing that I
Now,
did
I
yesterday.
don't know whether you are referring to Mr. Selega or to me.
Or myself. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I would think that in order for us to deal with this, Mr. Chair, I would like to first deal with it holistically, rather than deal with each individual
Yes.
item by item.
Okay, you want to give a broad answer,
context, and then
we can see
and then
whether
we can
go
see
to,
where
yeah.
it
Okay,
leads us.
no, that's fine. I think that's fine.
Mr. Chair, I think the first point that we need to make is that the nexus of this affidavit of Ms. Suleiman,
Sorry, you say the essence?
Mr. Chair, the origins of Ms. Suleiman's affidavit
Yes.
arises from a concern that Mr. Koko raised with the Commission vis-a-vis the affidavit of Ms. Halima. And I think you then directed the Commission to do further investigations, if I'm not mistaken, which then gave rise to this affidavit.
I know that there was the discussion of travel agents' evidence during Mr. Koko's evidence, but I can't remember whether I directed anything. Yeah.
Well, anyway,
Yes.
this basically comes about.
Okay.
And one of the issues, Mr. Chair, that we can clearly see in Ms. Suleiman's affidavit is that she does concede that the issue of Mr. Koko was in fact an error. There was an error.
Yeah.
There was a clear error in terms of one of the aspects of Mr. Koko's travel documents relating to Ms. Halima's affidavit. So that's the first, let's say, issue that we have, or I have, with Ms. Suleiman's affidavit, is that you will find that it is riddled with inconsistency. And I would say errors, which I will take you through. And the first one I would like to point out is obviously Mr. Koko's admission by Ms. Suleiman that the document was incorrect. Mr. Chair, if we then go to...
Sorry, Mr.
Yeah, I would like Mr. Selega to remain in the driver's seat as far as this, but at some point you will be allowed to make all the points that you want to make.
Yep.
But I think for now, insofar as there are errors in Ms. Solomon's affidavit, I think it may be enough for you to simply say there are a number of errors that you have identified, or inconsistencies or contradictions or whatever it is in her affidavit, and later on you will identify them and say what you make of them.
Chairperson, again, sorry.
Yes.
I think the reason why my client wishes to start there is basically, and I don't want to give evidence on his behalf,
Yeah.
but what he's trying to say is, insofar as you're going to rely on this affidavit and the annexures, I have an issue with it because there's problems with it. There's problems with the annexures, there's problems. And you can't now ask me to comment on something where there's clear problems with it or clear issues with it. I want to explain to you why I say you as the evidence leader and your investigators cannot rely on these documents.
No, that's fine. I think let's go point by point, point by point. But if at the end you say, having gone point by point, I would like to say the following broadly, that's fine. But also as we go point by point, you will feel free to make whatever points. Or if you say, well, I'm listening to this, I'm not admitting it, but in terms of the broad response, I will be saying that this evidence in this affidavit should not be relied upon because it's got too many errors or the annexures are riddled with contradictions or errors. That's fine. But I think let's go point by point. As long as in the end you'll be able to make all the points you wish to make. Okay.
Yeah, Chair.
Mr. Slogan.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, then paragraph 22.1. We've asked you to comment on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 22.1. This refers to AC.
That's page 1565.4.
That relates to a booking that
8th of
she
June.
says was for you to fly from Dubai to Johannesburg on 8 June 2014.
Yes, Mr.
And she annexes Annexure SS1, Annexure SS2, Annexure SS3, and Annexure SS4. Do you want, Mr. Selega, that we go through those before he responds to those annexures?
I would like him to comment first on the content of that paragraph. That there was a booking for you from Dubai to Johannesburg.
Well, maybe then you mustn't ask him to comment on the paragraph in general. You must just put specific questions, such as, was there a booking that was made for you to fly from, that was made by Travel Excellence for you to fly from Dubai to Johannesburg on 8 June 2014? He might say, yes, there was, or he says, I don't know what they're talking about. So if you want him to, then maybe you just ask him specific questions based on a particular paragraph.
Thank you, Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Singh, that is the question then. In regard to the factual allegation made, can you confirm or not that there was a booking made for you by Travel Excellence to travel from Dubai to Johannesburg on 8 June 2014?
Mr. Chair, I deny that this booking was made on my instruction or on my behalf.
Yes.
Okay, so you, from what you are saying, I think you are saying they may have made a booking, but you didn't ask them to do it.
No.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Do you recall you traveling from Dubai to Johannesburg on the 8th of June 12th?
Or did you fly from Johannesburg, from Dubai to Johannesburg on that date, irrespective of who had made the booking?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Chair, I do not recall, but I know that from the Transnet work stream, it would appear that I was on an official trip during this period of time, and I had to be, and I was I think the return leg was via Dubai. So I would have traveled via Dubai on an official trip back to South Africa.
Yes. Okay, and you say you think it would have been on Transnet business?
Mr. Chair, based on the information that has been given to us by the Transnet stream,
Yes.
it would appear that it would have been official business at the time.
Okay.
Then there would have been no need for this ticket.
Yes. And the bookings, insofar as there may have been such a trip, the booking would have been made by, would it have been made by Travel Excellence?
Sorry, sir.
Would the booking, insofar as you may have traveled to Dubai on Transnet business on that day, or as you may have traveled from Dubai to Johannesburg, would Travel Excellence have been involved in making your booking?
No, sir.
It would not have. Insofar as you may have been traveling for Transnet business, would there have been a standard travel agents that Transnet would use?
Yes.
Yes. Well, what's the name of that one?
Mr. Chair, I'm not.
You can't remember.
I can't remember.
But there would have been a
There
standard
would have been,
travel
yes.
agents. Yeah.
Yes.
Therefore, to the extent that if indeed you did travel on Transnet business, that travel agency may well have records.
May have a level.
Yeah. Okay.
And hence, I'm saying I don't recall making this request.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Selega?
Yes, I think Ms. Suleiman herself says she cannot recall who made the request, but the booking was for you. And I think that's what we're seeking to confirm with you, that the booking from a flight from Dubai to Johannesburg was for you on the 4th of June 2014, 8th June 2014.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Well, he has said, as far as he is concerned, he never asked Travel Excellence to make any booking for him to travel from Dubai to Johannesburg on that date. And I understood you to say, and you must tell me if I am wrong, Mr. Singh, I understood you to imply that you never authorized anybody to ask Travel Excellence to make a booking for your traveling on that occasion.
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
Then they refer to the cost of that, which the invoice was addressed to you, although it was charged to Mr. Essa's account. But let's deal with the allegation that the invoice was addressed to you, which is SS2. On page 1565 and 13. The air ticket is also on the page just before that. So that invoice, what do you say about it, Mr. Singh?
Mr. Chair, I've never received this invoice. And as you'll see, Mr. Chair, it actually says ticket void. So
Where's that?
SS2
Yeah.
in the route, in the column saying route, the third line, it says ticket void.
Is it the invoice or the ticket?
SS2 annexure
That is the document
at
Yes.
1565.13.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I see where it says ticket void. In the
Yes,
column, you see where it
I've
says
just
that.
seen that.
Yeah.
Yes. So, what do you say
But-
about that? What are
Well,
you-
he was saying that he that he, as I understood, he never asked Travel Excellence to make this booking, and he didn't ask anybody to, or authorize anybody to ask Travel Excellence to do that. Is that right, Mr.
That is correct, Mr.
Singh?
Chair.
And then you were referring to the fact that it says ticket void as to suggest that
There was never a travel.
there was never, it was not used.
No.
But if it were to be found that you did actually travel on the 8th of June 2014 from Dubai to Johannesburg, of course, the question that would arise is how Travel Excellence would have known about your traveling
Well,
from
Mr. Chair,
Dubai to Johannesburg.
hence I wanted to paint the picture for you
Yes.
up front.
Yeah.
But it's fine, we will deal
Yeah,
with
you
that.
will do it, yeah.
But
But
these
you
are the-
will bear in
these-
mind that question.
Yes, but these are in fact the inconsistencies that you'll find
Yeah.
in every one of these things.
Yeah,
Mr.
okay,
Chair.
okay,
I mean, for example, they allocate this thing to Mr. S's account.
yeah,
I didn't instruct any of this to happen.
yeah. No,
Say again?
I said they allocate it to Mr. S's account, C000365, for
Yes.
example. I never issued an instruction to please charge my stuff to Mr. S's account.
yes, but remember that on their version, on her version, she says Mr. Salim Essa introduced you to Miss Solomon. Mr. Salim Essa, on her version, was keeping an account with them, was their client. And whenever they made bookings that related to you and other people, I think she says, they always connected those bookings with Mr. Salim Essa's account because he was seen by them as the guarantor. She put that in quotes, guarantor, in regard to those bookings, by which I mean they must have been thinking, well, in case this person doesn't pay, we will talk to Mr. Salim Essa to say, well, this is somebody that you introduced to us, so now they are not paying, so you must pay.
Well,
That's
well,
my understanding.
No, I agree with you, Mr. Chair, but let's deal with that matter, that
Yeah.
aspect
Yeah.
that you bring up. If Ms. Osman's version relating to the guarantor issue is to be correct, Mr. Essa, okay, during this period of time, he was in the country and he had an account. Post him leaving the country, I don't think he still has an account with Travel Excellence. And neither I would think that Travel Excellence continues to extend his guarantee status if it ever existed. Yet if I booked tickets with him post this period of time, and they still allowed me to have, let's call it a deferred payment type of arrangement. So who was guaranteeing my payments at that time when he was not there? So
You are saying that after Mr. Salim Essa had left the country, you have continued to have dealings with them and asked them to make bookings for you. Is that right?
that's correct.
And when you make those bookings, they invoice you, I assume, and you pay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So you ask, but your question is, how would Mr. Salim Essa be a guarantor after?
After.
Yeah. Of course, she's dealing here with a specific time, as I understand it, a specific time. And I don't know whether once he had left, they would still say guarantor, you know. And I don't even know whether their sense of guarantor is what I'm thinking. you know. But she says in her own affidavit that there are occasions when you called to make arrangements for payments. She says so in her affidavit, even during those times. And then I think there are occasions when she says Mr. Salim Essa made payment in regard to your traveling. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Seleka.
Yeah, let me ask this question, Chair, then maybe we could take the lunch gentlemen. Mr. Singh, when did Mr. Essa leave the country?
I have no idea.
You have no idea.
Well, it was reported in the media, so that's when I guess we know about it.
No, Mr. Singh. You are telling the chairperson what, from a factual point of view, is what you want to convey to him. That after Mr. Essa left the country, who would have served as the guarantor for the costs occasioned by your flight bookings? Now, the question is pertinent to that. When do you say then to the chairperson, did Mr. Essa leave the country?
Mr. Chair, I was making a general statement. I said I was making a general statement, Mr. Chair. I don't know the exact date when Mr. Essa left the country.
Well, you would not say you made bookings after Mr. Salim Essa had left. You requested Travel Excellence to make bookings for you after Mr. Salim Essa had left, unless there was a point that you regarded as the point when he left. So I think Mr. Seleka is asking, what is that point?
Well, Mr. Chair, as I said, I was making the comment generally. I really don't know the date on which he left or purported to leave. But I know that I've made travel bookings, I don't know how many, but I've made travel bookings with them.
Did you make travel bookings with Travel Excellence last year?
Yes, I think. Maybe one, I think.
Maybe one.
Yeah.
And 2019, do you recall? Did you make any?
I
Did you
think so,
request
maybe,
them to make any?
maybe one as well, one or two.
Maybe one as well. But are you saying that you don't have a time that you take as the time when Mr. Salim Essa left?
No.
Yeah, because that seems on the face of it to undermine the point you were making.
Well, Mr. Chair, as you were, let's say, moving backwards in terms of your timeline, in terms of saying, did you book one last year or did you book one the year before? I think that is the general point that I was trying to make, is that even as early as or as late as last year, if I had booked with them and he's not here, then who was guaranteeing? So that's the point that I was trying to make.
But do you regard last year as a time when he had left the country?
Yes, Mr. Chair, based on media, it's common cause that he's left by last year.
Yes, but your understanding is that he left around about when?
I wouldn't speculate.
But you say definitely by last year he had left.
Yes,
By beginning of last year, maybe?
Mr. Chair, I would be speculating. But I know, Mr. Chair, my point that I'm trying to make is, if it is that these guarantee facilities were what were available, I'm saying I did not enjoy those facilities through Mr. Essa.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
But just before we adjourn,
Yeah.
and we will adjourn. Mr. Singh, you then cannot, and I think you have to accept that you cannot use the general statement as a point of criticism in relation to this affidavit.
No, but that's why I said, that's why I requested for the chair to allow me the indulgence of dealing with it holistically. So all of these things will be put into context. Else we're going to deal with these issues
No,
individually, and you're going to get to a point where you're going to ask me this question.
No, but you are not addressing what I'm saying to you. You cannot use your general statement, which you said it is, as a point of criticism in relation to this affidavit. Do you accept that?
I accept that, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Chair, we can take a lunch adjournment.
Okay, let's take the lunch adjournment. It's 1:20. We'll resume at 2:20.
Thank you.
We adjourn.
No, I'm not saying it's
That seems to be the problem. I can fix it now. Do you want?